Novitas Solutions, a CMS contractor, welcomes you to the On-Demand Education Series. This on-demand tutorial is a general summary that explains certain aspects of the Medicare program, but it is not a legal document. The official Medicare program provisions are contained in the relevant laws, regulations, and rulings. The information enclosed was current at the time it was presented. Medicare policy changes frequently. Links to the source documents have been provided within the document for your reference. This presentation was prepared as a tool to assist providers and is not intended to grant rights or impose obligations. Throughout this module, you will see a citation number behind certain elements of information as shown in the example below. This citation number coincides with the transcript document positioned next to the Play Now icon you selected on the Training Videos Click and Play page on the Novitas Solutions website. The citation and associated hyperlink to the resource described in the module will be found on the transcript under footnotes for each slide.
Novitas Solutions On-Demand Education Series presents PCACE, New Installation and Setup. What is PCACE? PCACE is a free billing software used for entering Medicare Part A and B claims and reviewing or translating acknowledgement reports and remittance advices. Prior to completing the PCACE installation, providers must verify technical requirements are met for the program and complete the enrollment process. Once the enrollment form is processed, the MAC will issue download instructions and the installation password. Providers must keep this password as it will be required for each quarterly upgrade or new installation. PCACE enrollment. Although PCACE creates a mechanism to create claims and translate feedback reports, the provider still needs a submission method for claim submission. Providers can use a secure file transfer protocol, or SFTP, which is paid directly through an approved vendor, or use the Novitas Sphere portal. Providers will submit the EDI enrollment form designated for either SFTP or the Novitas Sphere portal to enroll in PCACE. For additional assistance with completing the forms, review our helpful article with general tips for completing EDI enrollment forms on the EDI Center of the website. Starting installation. Once the provider receives notification from the MAC to install, the provider will navigate to the PCACE full installation webpage. In the Download File section, the provider may select the PCACE Full Installation Direct.exe file or the PCACE Full Installation zipped file link. Both links will provide the same program in a different delivery method. It's important to note here that only one submitter ID per contract can be set up in the PCACE software program. So if a provider has more than one submitter ID per contract, they must either install PCACE on separate computers or enroll for one submitter ID and link all their providers to that submitter ID. Run the .exe file. The direct file link will open the file directly. Depending on the internet browser and settings, the file may need saved to the computer before running. The zipped file link will provide the file through the Secure Zip program. The file will need to be extracted from Secure Zip before being opened. Install the software. Once a selection is made, a pop-up box may appear to allow changes to the device. If so, the provider will need to click Allow to proceed with the software installation. This will then prompt the provider to enter the password that was provided in the welcome letter received after enrolling for electronic billing with PCACE. Finish the installation. The provider then clicks Next through the installation wizard screens and clicks Finish at the end. This completes the PCACE installation, and the provider is now ready to set up the software. Sign on to PCACE. The PCACE icon, shown here with the lightning bolt, can be opened from the provider's desktop. If the icon is not on the desktop, the provider may have to search for PCACE in their Windows Explorer, where it should be found in the C drive. Once the icon is found and opened from the PCA's toolbar, the provider clicks on the picture of the yellow folder to open the reference file maintenance. This will open the sign-on screen where the provider will type SYSADMIN for both the user ID and the password. Program tips. Before we continue, let's review some helpful program tips which will assist with using PCAs. First, clicking Save on any screen will show all fields that are required with a flashing notification. Additionally, pressing the Escape key will disable the flashing notifications. Also, to identify fields that contain a lookup list, hold the Alt key and press F2. And last, to view the lookup list, press the F2 function key when the cursor is in the field, or right-click the mouse over the field. When an item from the list is selected, its value is automatically entered in the field. Set up the submitter information. Now let's review setting up the submitter information. To do this, the provider clicks on the Codes Miscellaneous tab in Reference File Maintenance and then clicks on Submitter. The provider must then select the appropriate claim type, either institutional or professional. For our demonstration, we'll use professional throughout this module. If the provider submits claims to only one contract or payer ID, then they click on the submitter line shown in blue and then click on View Update. However, if the provider submits claims to more than one contract or payer ID, then they click on New. Complete the General tab. This will prompt the provider to complete the General tab. For multiple contracts, the provider will right-click in the LOB and payer ID fields and select the appropriate line of business and payer ID. The provider will then type their submitter ID in the ID field. The submitter ID is provided in the EDI welcome letter, and Novitas Sphere users can also find the submitter ID in the My Account Profile feature. The provider then completes the remaining information, including the email field, leaving the Employer Identification Number or EIN field blank. If the provider submits only one contract, they click Save and are finished with the submitter setup. Set up additional contracts, Prepare tab. If the provider submits to multiple contracts, there are additional setup steps, starting with the Prepare tab. On this tab, the submission status defaults to P for production. If the provider is sending a test file, the submission status should be changed to a T. The EMC file name should be trans.dat for institutional and trans.b.dat for professional. Set up additional contracts, ANSI Info tabs. Next is the ANSI Info tab. The provider will type ZZ in the field for the submitter qualifier and ZZ again in the field for the receiver qualifier. The provider will also type the number 1 in the acknowledgement requested field. Everything else on the ANSI Info tab should be blank. Please note that nothing should be entered in the ANSI Info 2 or ANSI Info 4 tabs unless directed by an Electronic Data Interchange or EDI staff member. The provider then will click Save and Close. This will take them back to the Submitter Setup window where they can repeat the submitter information setup steps for each contract or payer ID. Set up the provider information. After completing the submitter information, the provider will set up the provider information. The provider will click on the Provider Institutional tab for Part A or Provider Professional tab for Part B in Reference File Maintenance and then click on New. Please note, this screen is only for the billing and/or rendering provider information. We will review in a moment where to enter the other physician information. Set up the provider information, Part A. Let's look at the provider information for Part A. Institutional providers should complete the General Information tab with the information specific to their facility. They would complete all fields, including typing the Provider Transaction Access Number, or PTAN, in the Provider ID field and then click Save. Set up the provider information, Part B. This is the provider information for Part B. Professional providers must choose the appropriate provider type option before completing the setup. For a group practice, the provider must complete the group practice information and then enter at least one individual in group. Organizations without rendering providers, such as labs, ambulatory surgery centers, and ambulances, should be set up as solo practice. The professional providers would complete the screen with the information specific to their office. They would complete all fields, including typing the PTN in the group ID field, and then click Save. Set up other insurance information. After completing the provider information, the Payer tab would be updated, but this would only be completed if the provider needs to enter a Medigap or an insurance that is primary to Medicare. To set up this type of other insurance information, the provider clicks on the Payer tab from the Reference File Maintenance icon. Then the provider would click on the New button and complete all fields with the information specific to each payer. The payer ID in this screen will be the Medigap number, supplemental insurance company's identification number, or the primary insurance company's identification number. After completing the information, the provider clicks on Save and repeats for each insurance as needed. Note, secondary payer information should only be entered for Medigap insurers. No additional payer information needs to be entered except for Medigap insurances and primary insurances when Medicare is the secondary payer. Automatic crossover companies do not need to be entered. Set up the patient information. The provider will also set up patient information. The patient information entered in this file will be available to automatically load from the patient list when entering claims. To set up the patient information, first click on the Patient tab in Reference File Maintenance, and then click on New to display the patient information form. The provider enters the patient information in all applicable tabs, completing the name exactly as it is shown on the patient's Medicare card. The General Information and Primary Insured tabs are required to be completed, and the other tabs are optional. After all information is completed for the patient, the provider clicks on Save. If prompted, the provider would correct any missing or invalid field values and resave the data. These steps would be repeated for each patient. Set up the physician information. We previously reviewed where to enter billing and rendering provider information. We'll now review entering referring, ordering, attending, or supervising physician information. To enter this type of physician information, the provider would click on the Codes Miscellaneous tab in Reference File Maintenance. The provider would then click on Physician, then New, and complete the fields with information specific to the physician. The physician ID and address information may be left blank. The federal tax ID may be filled in with a generic number if not known. And the physician's National Provider Identifier or NPI number would be entered in the NPI field. Once all information has been entered for the physician, the provider clicks on Save and repeats these steps for each physician. Set up the facility information. The last part of setup is the facility information. This screen is for entering the facility other than the office where the service was rendered. The provider starts by clicking on the Codes Miscellaneous tab and Reference File Maintenance. The provider then clicks on Facility, then New, and completes the fields with the name and address of the facility, which requires a 9-digit postal zip code. While completing the information, the provider must also choose the appropriate facility type. Once the information is completed, the provider clicks Save. And this completes the PCA setup. The provider is now ready to enter claims. Resources. There are several PCS resources found on our website, including user guides, quick steps, and training modules. EDI Help Desk. The EDI Help Desk is another valuable resource. The JH EDI Help Desk can be reached by calling 1-855-252-8782 and selecting option 3. And the JL EDI Help Desk can be reached by calling 1-855-235-8073 and selecting option 3. Our providers can also reach our Novitas Help Desk by calling 8424.
Thank you for attending. We encourage you to visit our website at www.novitas-solutions.com to access additional on-demand resources or participate in our educational events. Visit our Learning Center to access the most current Medicare education.